Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Colton, and in this video, I want to talk about something I call the creative motivational roller coaster. And this is something I experience really every day that I've kind of learned to cope with and identify. And so I want to share that with all of you to see if maybe this is something that resonates with you, and if so, some tangible tips that might also help you out. So I'll talk about my experience with the creative motivational roller coaster and what that sort of is. To me, it's the change between feeling highly creative, highly motivational, those times where you feel totally inspired, you can do anything and you're actively doing anything. And then the other times where you feel like you can't think of a single good idea and you can't get yourself to actually do anything. You feel completely uninterested, completely unmotivated, and even that sort of in-between time, which to me really looks like a roller coaster, right? You have those peaks where you feel really creative and motivated, and then you have the valleys where you feel totally unmotivated and uncreative, and you have those times in between where you have some varying levels of creativity and motivation. And much like a roller coaster, sometimes that in-between time is really short. One day you're super creative, the next morning you wake up, no motivation at all. And sometimes that in-between time is much more feathered out, where you're feeling really creative, and then over like a week you start to move towards being uncreative like 2 weeks later. Much like a roller coaster, right? At the start, you have the beginning, tink, 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 pulling you up to the top. And then when you drop from the top, it's a really quick amount of time before you're at the bottom. And so I think it works pretty well as a roller coaster analogy. And so for me, I find that I hit those peaks, I know a valley's coming up, and sure enough, that valley hits. And sometimes it's difficult to identify why I was feeling so creative one day and then super uncreative the next day. Sometimes it's a little more clear, where it's like, okay, I have a lot of stresses happening this week. I'm trying to find a new apartment, or got some bad medical news, or, a dog passed away or something. And so that outside factor changed my internal feelings of motivation and creativity. But sometimes I feel like it's a body chemical thing. Like if I was feeling really creative and really motivated, then I sort of have to pay the price later on, where there's like sort of a deficit of that creativity and motivation because of how much happened. It's almost like happiness. For me, if I have a day where like everything is awesome and I do all of my favorite things with all of my favorite people and I just feel so great that day, I always know that the next day or a couple days later, maybe a week, there's going to be a moment where I just feel totally depressed. And it's almost like I released too much serotonin and dopamine that day that was really great. And so now my body doesn't have enough to support me later in the week. Not sure if that's an ADHD thing, if that's a me thing, or if that's something that we all experience, but I would imagine we all experience it to various degrees. And you may even be able to consider this as kind of a spectrum thing as well. But to me, I think that roller coaster analogy just feels like it fits the best. So we've identified what this is. How do we cope with it? So I want to share my experience, how I cope with it, as well as maybe a couple tips that you could try out for yourself. So for me, the biggest part of this is constantly being, I guess, introspective and trying to identify what stage of this roller coaster am I in. Just having self-awareness to say, oh, I'm feeling really creative and really motivated right now. I know this won't last. I also know I have no idea how long or how short it will be, so I need to take action now. I need to plan out stuff. I need to brainstorm things. Even more than that, I need to sit down and physically record a bunch of stuff, or take a bunch of pictures, or frame a bunch of images, right? Like I need to actually leverage this creativity and motivation while I have it, because I know I won't have it the next day or the next week. And so oftentimes I will prioritize getting a lot of projects done or getting a lot of progress made on existing projects and kind of somewhat sacrificing to a little bit of an extent my own personal time, being that like, okay, maybe I won't watch as much TV, I won't play as much video games, I won't go out with friends quite as much in this day or these few days because I know I'm having that creative energy and I really want to maximize it while I've got it. I will also tend to try to knock out some of the hardest parts of a project while I'm feeling super creative. So like the talking head part of a video is always one of the hardest parts to do. So I'll sit down and record that while I'm feeling creative so that it's not something I've saved for later when I'm struggling with motivation. Now, that's when I'm feeling good. What about when I'm feeling bad? So in the moments where, oops, creativity's gone, I don't feel inspired at all, I'm struggling with motivation, I can't even get myself to do much work, then the goal is, again, identifying that, oh, I'm in this stage, this is why I'm feeling this way, and then how much can I get away with, or how much of myself do I need to prioritize here? So, of course, not every valley is as deep, not every peak is as high, right? Sometimes when you go into the valley, you know, okay, I'm not terribly unmotivated, but I am feeling unmotivated. So then the priority for me becomes, well, what smaller bite-sized parts of projects can I tackle? Because those will be easier to motivate myself to do. As an example, it's a lot easier and a lot less time to create a thumbnail than it is to record an entire talking head. So maybe I want to save the thumbnail work for towards the end of a project so that when I'm not feeling as motivated, well, it's a lot easier for me to go create that thumbnail. And then if I'm successful in motivating myself to do the thumbnail, I'm going to feel good that I completed that. And that in of itself may kind of spur me to then take on another small piece of a project. So it's sort of kind of categorizing your goals and focusing on the more easily achievable ones to then make yourself still get work done and still feel a bit productive. Another good example would be when I'm not feeling creative, probably not the best time to try to start brainstorming new ideas, but it could be a good time to take the existing ideas and simply work on prioritizing them in order of which ones I want to tackle first. I mean, it doesn't really take much creativity to just say, oh, I want to do this one, then this one, then this one, and set that sort of priority. So that's a small task that I can then do when I'm not motivated to sort of set me up for more success the next time I am motivated. So it's almost a little bit of kind of like setting some of that planning stuff that's very easy to do that will then already give me the structure in place so that the next time I'm creative, I can immediately start taking action. I don't have to do any plans. The plans are already set. Now, there is also the element of times where I am hitting a really low valley. I'm maybe really stressed in my life, or I'm feeling a bit depressed, or just other factors. And so I'm not creative at all. I'm not motivated at all. And even the smallest, little, tiniest task feels too much to do. And it's times like that I really have to stop and think, hey, is this a moment where I actually need to stop all creative projects and prioritize rest, right? Take a step back and maybe just spend an evening watching TV, maybe go to bed early, maybe cook a meal that's like really easy to make but enjoyable to consume, like macaroni and cheese, and just settle in for some me time, or maybe even go out with some friends and just have a nice time, you know, going bar hopping or watching a movie or doing putt-putt, you know, like just take a complete step away from the creative projects and not do anything and allow myself to have some time away from that to recuperate so that I can then recharge a bit. And sometimes that ends up being the best possible thing I can do in those moments. I think there's also that sort of in-between time, which maybe gets looked at the least because it's the least extreme, but sometimes is what makes up the majority of your creative roller coaster time, right? Is that in between where you're not at a peak and you're not at a valley. What do you do in those times? For me, it's about identifying a routine and trying to find a balance between rest, social time, you know, fun with games or TV shows, right? That sort of balance. And then also the routine and balance of getting some projects done, making tangible progress in creative series I'm working on or YouTube videos. Because I find if I can maintain that balance really well, I can keep myself in that in-between time for a longer period and be a bit more consistent, right? Consistency is really important. I even have a video on consistency that I'll link here and I'll include at the end of the video if you're interested in that. But being in that in-between time really is kind of the sweet spot because you're creative and you're motivated, but it's also manageable. You're not in the extreme of being way too creative or way too uncreative, for lack of a better term. So it's really about establishing that balance, not necessarily trying to maximize something or cope with something, but just keep things even and sustainable. And so that's what I try to do in that in-between time. So those are my experience, my sort of coping mechanism with the creative motivational roller coaster. Some quick, tangible tips, I think, for you based on what I said is number one, when you recognize you're having a moment of intense creativity and motivation, maximize it. Try to take advantage of it. That doesn't necessarily mean do a million projects. It could just be focus all of that energy on one specific project and make real strong progress with it. But it could also mean, yeah, knock out a few miscellaneous projects and get a bunch of stuff done. So it's just recognizing that and maximizing it. And then also allocating certain tasks for later because you know you're going to come down from that peak, right? And I think that's where another tip comes in is that when you're in the valley and you're struggling with motivation, finding smaller projects that you can do or smaller tasks that you can very easily knock out so that you're still making progress, but you're doing it at an achievable level. And the fact that you achieve a few of those small tasks may help get you out of that creative rut because you start feeling better. Oh, I completed this. I'm on a roll. I'm going to knock out this next thing, right? So, setting proper goals at that valley is really important. And also knowing when to take a step away so that you don't burn out. When to say, okay, I'm not feeling this right now. I need to go do something relaxing or something fun to take my mind off of this. And then later I'll come back and I'll be feeling better and I can then start getting projects done again. And then the final tip is just when you're in the in-between time, try to find that balance. Try to maximize that in-between time and have a good balance of social time and fun, but also creative energy and project, focused time. So those are my tips for all of you. I think if you have experienced this to any degree, please share that experience, if you will, in the comment section, because I think it's always really insightful to see how other people go through this sort of roller coaster. And especially if you have tips for what's worked for you, even more so if they're different from the tips that I shared, please definitely share those in the comment section because other people in the future will view this video and maybe what I've said doesn't work for them, but what you say does work for them. So it's all about giving people an idea of what other people are doing that gives them a starting point to then figure out what works best for each individual. So please do share if you're interested or you have the time. If you got anything out of this video, if it was helpful or interesting at all, please do give me a thumbs up. It helps me out tremendously. It also gives me a little bit of a dopamine boost and makes me feel good, so you could directly put a smile on someone's face. And then, beyond all that, if you want to see more videos like this, or if you want to join me on my creative journey, then hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, and that's going to keep you in the know for when the next video drops. But for now, I'm Colton. I'll see you in the next one.